Hello everybody, my name is Brady and we are back with another React video, and today we're going to be checking out more extra history. But before we get started, I do want to give a shout out to the newest channel member. Thank you to the Coors Entertainment for becoming a channel member, and if any of you want to become a channel member, you can click the link in the description box below to do so. Now let's get into the main video. So today we're going to be checking out the history of paper money, and in the future with the extra history series, keep an eye on the community tab. I'm going to be putting out a new poll to determine the next several extra history series I'm going to be checking out. In the last one, Otto von Bismarck won, so I did it first. Then I did Admiral Yi because it came in second. This is the third. So next I'm going to be doing South Sea Bubble, but the next poll is going to have a whole bunch, and depending on what comes first, second, third, or fourth, that's going to be the order in which I do them next. I'm going to figure it all out at once, so keep an eye on that community tab. So this one should be a lot of fun. I encounter paper money a lot in my area of study. Being from Rhode Island, we printed a lot of our own currency early on, and it was pretty much worthless. We go to the other states and we're like, please accept our worthless paper money, and they're like, no, we don't want to accept your worthless paper money. That's a case of paper money being used poorly because it wasn't worth anything. So this is going to be really cool learning about the foundations of that, because I don't know too much about the early stuff when it comes to paper money. I don't even really know where paper money started, so this should be pretty cool. Let's get it started.
How did humanity come to accept rectangular pieces of pulped trees as something to spend 8 to 10 hours a day working for?
He mentions that it's made of pulped trees. In the United States, our money is like mostly cotton, a little bit linen. So our bills have like a particular feel to them. It's probably very different from, I know my audience is rather international. If you haven't been to the United States, if you haven't handled our currency, it's got a very special feel to it. I'm sure it feels different from wherever you come from.
It's a pretty insane story. This change from hard currency like gold or silver is a really huge deal. Without it, we couldn't possibly have the massive industrial and post-industrial economies we know today. This change revolutionized how we do business, and forever altered how governments were financed. Learning about this massive sea change in how we, as a species, thought about money can help us reflect on our current historical shift, from seeing paper as money to seeing bits, seeing digital ones and zeros as money.
I really like that bit because it showed like the Bitcoin thing. And right now that's a really big conversation. People are paying a lot more attention to things like Bitcoin, like Dogecoin, even though it's a bit of a novelty. It is something that people are paying a lot more attention to. And when civilizations went from like hard currency to paper currency, there was probably a similar level of skepticism. And I'm not saying every digital currency is created equal, but that is definitely the direction that we are moving in. And eventually, I have faith that we are going to find something that ends up working rather well, and it will be will work rather universally. I feel pretty confident in that. I'm just not sure exactly what form it's going to come in. But when people saw that we were going from paper money, well, from hard money to paper money, there were a lot of skeptics. And I'm not saying like originally, I'm just more talking in my area of study. There are a lot of people who were really into hard money. They didn't want the paper money. They felt like that's unstable. I don't know. But now we look at paper money and it feels a little bit more stable, with some exceptions. Obviously, nothing's perfect, but it's an interesting conversation. So we probably feel the same thing about going to a digital currency that people felt back then going to like a paper currency. Is it stable? I don't know. It's like similar concerns. It's a little more complicated, but similar.
But before we can get to the exciting story of people trying to convince other people that paper was worth something, to understand why this is such a huge deal, we have to discuss a bit about how we thought about money before paper. If we go way back to the beginning of society, we find trade. Before early humans even really settled down, there's evidence that when we met, we exchanged things we had made or things we'd found. But as soon as humans started to cultivate the earth and form societies, we started to specialize, and that meant that we not only loved to trade, we had to. Now, often when we think of trade, we think of long-distance trade. We think of caravans loaded with exotic goods. But for our story, we have to talk about local trade. Because here's where we run into the problem of coincidence of wants. Or rather, we run into it everywhere, but if we fail to solve this problem at the local level, society breaks down, and we can't have the specialized trades we need to run anything beyond the smallest gathering of people. So, what is a coincidence of wants? It's the basis on which trade can exist. Let's say that I make shirts, and you grow food. Well, if you want a shirt and I want food, awesome, we can trade. But if I don't want your stupid food, or if you're all full up on shirts, well, we can't trade, can we?
And that's why you need kind of something in the middle that you can exchange. And you could know that I can spend this on something else in the future. And let's say you're the person who has everything you need right now. You might need that guy's food later. You might need those shirts later. And you don't want the food or shirt guy to go out of business in the meantime. You want them to be able to get stuff. Just because you don't want stuff from them right now, you might need something from them in the future. So you don't want them to completely go out of business and not be, because if they can't get their food, they might not be able to sustain their shirt business around here or something like that. And then you got no more shirt guy. What if you rip your shirt? You can't go to shirt guy anymore. He's gone. He couldn't get his food. He had to go somewhere else.
And that starts becoming a real problem for society if I want food, but you don't want my shirts. Maybe I can find somebody with some third good that you do want, but that means that a lot of time is consumed by trading, and if I can't find some other good you want to trade for, well, there's gonna be trouble. And this problem runs even deeper than we sometimes think about when you consider the lack of refrigeration and transportation. Imagine I'm a fisherman and you're a farmer, and let's say that we want to trade. Well, there's this problem. Your harvest only comes in once a year. I can't trade you for a harvest you don't have yet, and all of those extra fish I caught today are going to be pretty rotten by the time your harvest comes in. And while this may seem like a very specific example, trade for food was probably the most prevalent trade of the ancient world. So we need to find a third good that we both want that we can trade for.
The cool thing about this, we're not even getting to paper money here. We have to explain how just money works. Where does it come from? And that's a very interesting question. I'm curious to what some like the earlier examples might have used in the place. Like we have the typical shiny things like gold and silver. Some civilizations use different kinds of shells and stuff like that. There's a million different things you could use as a currency. So if we're going into that, I'm very curious to what like the early civilizations did. Because we didn't really have a lot of pure barter societies when people started settling down, because they were generally not that profitable. I'm not saying barter didn't occur. Barter definitely occurred, but like full-on barter economies, there's not a whole lot of examples of them. I can't think of many off the top of my head, many of which did find this third thing.
But wouldn't it be convenient if there was some universal third good which everybody wanted and would trade for, so we didn't have to do some long chain of bartering every time we wanted something? Enter money. All money is a third good that doesn't spoil and that we all agree has value, thus becoming a unit of exchange, an intermediary good by which all other goods can be traded. And while we often think of coins made of precious metals for this purpose, the truth is, so long as it's durable enough and hard enough to procure, anything can serve as money. Tangent time. Turns out we have used a lot of weird stuff as money over our history.
And he talked, before he gets into this bit, he talked a little bit about how it has to be kind of scarce. And that's what separates paper money from hard money. Because paper, there's so much paper. You can print all the paper money in the world. It doesn't inherently have value unless you have faith in the institutions behind it that endorse that paper money, that ensure that that paper money actually works. I'm curious to see where they're going with this next part, though.
Tangent time.
What have we
Turns out
used?
we have used a lot of weird stuff as money over our history. For example, cattle have often served as money. I mean, they're fairly durable, they last for years, they're practical, and they're
That's
reasonably
interesting.
scarce. When Europeans arrived in the Americas, alcohol often served as currency. You could literally drink your paycheck. Cigarettes have often become money of prisons and POW camps. Back in ancient China, money in the shape...
I like that example. The example of like cigarettes in prison, because you wouldn't think of that very much as an economy, but they do build their own internal economy. And nobody told them that it had to be that way. They all just kind of recognize that a lot of people want this. This can be moved around in order to procure other things that you might want. I don't know what they're getting in exchange or what they're giving for cigarettes in this case. I'm not super familiar with prison culture, but I find that example to be especially interesting and shows how diverse economic systems can be.
Of tools, and then knives became some of the first examples of precious metal money. And, my personal favorite, on the island of Yap, gigantic limestone donuts serve as money. They are so huge that once they are brought to the island, no one even moves them. They just remember who owns which ones. In fact, all of these stones had to be quarried off-island because there's no naturally occurring limestone on Yap. And once, when a crew was coming back from a quarrying expedition, a storm hit and sent their stone to the bottom of the ocean. But the crew survived and told everybody what had happened, and the islanders decided that, it still counted. So, to this day, somebody owns that giant piece of stone money at the bottom of the sea. And even though it's not really in use today, for hundreds of years that stone was used to buy and sell things, even though no one had ever seen it. Giving Yap, in some ways, one of the most forward-thinking monetary systems before the modern era. But if we want to talk about...
That's really interesting. And you might think, like, why would these people just kind of take their word for it? Well, if they lost that stone, it would be essentially removed from their economy. And the reason these things exist is because you want this sort of value in order to exchange goods. You don't necessarily always just want to hoard your money for the sake of hoarding your money. In cases like this, you want that to be in circulation. And if everybody can agree, yeah, this is in circulation, it would only be to everybody's benefit. If they decided to be hardasses about it, that thing is just removed from this economy that they developed. Nobody gets anything from that. And therefore, whoever would procure it from the previous person doesn't get to use it on something else. So, yeah. In that sort of economy, it wouldn't really pay as much to be a hard ass.
About the king of them all, the form of money that has been used the longest and over the widest expanse of the globe, we have to talk about one thing. Nope, not gold, although in fairness, that's what I would have guessed too. Nope, it's the cowrie shell. It's durable, impossible to counterfeit, and without modern harvesting techniques, it's not so easy to acquire that inflation will run rampant.
I don't know as much about this particular shell. In the Northeast, Native Americans used something called wampum, and it wasn't necessarily currency in the sense that Europeans understood it, but Europeans saw them giving wampum to other people, and they were like, oh, that's money. That must be their money, because that's how they look at it. Like, they see people giving something to somebody else, and they think, oh, that looks like somebody's giving somebody money for something. Though it's not exactly the same. The Europeans got a bunch of wampum and flooded the so-called market, and essentially it had some value as money in that sense. But yeah, shells, that is definitely an example of currency. This is a fun example. I'm curious about this one.
Anyway, tangent over, back on target.
Aw, man.
We have lots
It's
of
over?
different possible
Wanna know
types of
more.
pre-modern money, including the gold and silver coins that we so often think of when we think of money of the past. But all of these different types of money have one thing in common. They are what we call commodity money, because their value is in the commodity themselves. Even cowries were seen as rare and beautiful and could be used for jewelry and the like, and so were thought of as having intrinsic value, the same way we feel gold has an intrinsic value for its scarcity and its uses. Now that makes a lot of sense for a currency. It feels secure and reasonable. you can trust to the worth of that gold coin in your hand. I mean, after all, if you're used to trading one thing for another, why would you ever trade something valuable like a horse for something worthless like a pile of paper? But for gold or for cowries, well, that's another story. But when your economy grows, this system starts showing some of its limits.
I mean, if you were in a civilization where, for some reason, paper was scarce, paper would be valuable. It could potentially be valuable, at least, if people chose to put that sort of value in it. If you're in a place where paper is scarce, you might also have some other problems. Who knows? I don't know. You probably don't have a lot of trees. That might be a pain.
For one thing, commodity money is heavy. If you're doing massive deals, it gets really hard to transport, and it's risky to transport across lawless lands. Commodity money is also often subject to debasing, where somebody, usually the person who should be responsible for making sure the currency maintains its value, waters down the whiskey or takes a gold coin, melts it down, and reforges it with a bit less gold in it, and passes it off as worth the same amount. But more than anything, when you get to gigantic...
Oh, I hope there's stuff on counterfeiting. Once we get into paper money, that's something I really want to get into. I read a little bit, and I don't know too much about Isaac Newton, but I know he spent some of his life fighting against counterfeiting, and that was like a big thing that he did, and that's something that I always wanted to learn more about. I don't expect to get like the specific story of Isaac Newton on here, but I hope that we could get something on counterfeiting, and probably in the later episodes once we actually get into paper money. Right now, we're not really touching paper money yet. I think we have to get some sort of like a banking system or something resembling a banking system before we can get to like the sort of IOU type of system. I guess we'll probably start with IOUs, right? I would assume.
Economies, the very scarcity that makes commodity money seem to have value becomes your enemy. Like, let's take gold and silver. What happens when your economy grows to the point where you just can't get enough of it? We actually saw the effects of this in our episode on the Opium Wars, where so much English silver was ending up in China in exchange for tea, it was actually causing inflation and hampering basic economic transactions at home. And this really comes into effect when we get to more modern government finance and the financing of war. What happens to a nation when it has to make a sudden drastic uptick in its spending but can't get enough specie to cover its cost, even from those who are willing to lend?
I'm taking a class on the Atlantic world. It's kind of a vague topic, but it's a lot of like Spanish Empire, British Empire, and New World stuff. And that was like the big thing that the Spanish Empire was trying to get out of the New World. They brought back so much like hard money materials from the New World, and that's one of the big things that the Spanish Empire was going for when they traveled over there. You hear like the stories of like the City of Gold and like everybody coming over to America trying to find gold. Some had better luck than others, but you know.
As I am sure we will see in future Extra History episodes, it plays havoc with an economy, and even the ability to prosecute a war. And the reverse of this is true as well. Currencies based on scarcity are often subject to changes in the scarcity of the commodity on which they're based, which can be trouble when somebody finds a lot more of your currency commodity. When Spain started to import massive amounts of silver and gold from the Americas, all the precious metal-based currency in Europe started to suffer from inflation. After all those gold coins weren't worth nearly as much since somebody had just dumped a huge new pile of gold on European shores. And as a government or even a financial sector, when someone digging up a new pile of minerals means that you can't control your own fiscal policy, that's bad news. But those disadvantages are only easy to see if you're a head of state or working on the largest scale transactions. If you're just some average person in the streets, when some well-to-do says that they want to take your grain in exchange for this nice slip of... is that paper? Well, you would be forgiven for thinking that you smell a rat. Join us next time as we finally delve into the origins of paper money and start to address this problem of people fearing to give up their outdated gold.
So we haven't even really touched paper money that much yet, but yeah, we'll probably get like IOUs or something, and then we'll probably get something generally resembling banking, and that is like... a lot of institutions kind of like that tend to back the value of the IOUs. Like you can have personal IOUs, and that's about as good as your word is worth. But then if you have like institutions like banks that can back your money, that can kind of reinforce that your IOU or whatever you're giving somebody has value, then you got a system working there. I'm excited to see where this one goes. I think this was a really fun one. This is different from other extra history series that we've checked out because we've followed countries, we've followed people. Now we're following an idea, so I don't expect this one to go by the same formula of other extra history stuff because it's already broken the formula. It's talking about paper money. It's not talking about some admiral. It's not talking about some foreign conflict. It defies borders. It's really, as far as scale goes, one of the biggest topics that I've seen from extra history in the series that I've seen so far. It really doesn't seem to have any restrictions, so I'm very excited to see where they go with it. If you like this video, subscribe for more, become a channel member, buy a sticker. Birdmom would be very happy if you did. And I think that's about it. Let me know which series should be in the next extra history poll, which ones you'd want to see in the future. I'm going to be cranking these out relatively quickly, so it's right around the corner, basically. I'm going to need that poll by the time I start up the South Sea bubble stuff, because I want to give you guys plenty of time to answer that. So thanks for watching, and I will see you guys tomorrow with another video. All right.